Hello again. So today I am with Michelle for a second talk. And in this talk, she's going to be talking about living the sacred goddess and focusing specifically on Juno, Vesta, Pallas, Athene, and Ceres, who are four of the goddesses in astrology who we associate with the asteroid goddesses. And I introduced Michelle in that earlier talk, but I'm going to do it again so that you can hear about her. So Michelle is a certified professional astrologer. She sees astrology as a tool for healing and insight. Her research is in healing trauma, looking at relationships and family constellations in the birth chart for the purpose of healing and love. She is a mother and a student of A Course in Miracles. She practices meditation and intentional creativity while devoting her life to raising children, practicing partnership, and building community. And she is also the founder of Goddess, tell me again the exact title, Goddess
Astrology Collective.
There we go. So she is very equipped to speak about this topic, and I'm really excited.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
And the work on the Goddess Astrology Collective is really about creating a collective space for living learning and devotional practice related to the goddesses, learning about them, integrating. We have every month a moon ceremony devoted to the moon and to the present moment expression of the goddesses in the chart. And I teach different classes on the goddesses, including a free class that's being offered to all of your participants. So along with resources and tools of really integrating this healing journey and the soul work that I feel is really present with the archetypal goddesses. And so, yeah, I wanted to speak today about just what it means to be living the goddesses. And these four core goddesses representing very core facets of our inner and outer dimensions, our inner and outer lives, our personal, in astrology, there are personal planets, and those are considered to be the sun and the moon and Venus and Mars. They're the faster moving bodies. And then there are outer planets like Pluto and Saturn and Uranus, slower moving planets, especially Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, where their movement is reflective of much more core, soul, larger dynamics. And these particular goddesses, Juno, Vesta, Pallas, Athene, and Ceres, I consider more of inner planet goddesses. They move quite quickly through the chart. They move in relationship to all of the planets, and they reflect very deep and ancient stories and myths regarding the feminine in particular, but they're present in all of us. These stories are alive in all of our lives, and everyone's birth chart has these goddesses in them, whether or not you use them in daily practice. So a part of my work, and I feel my research, is this bringing to life, reinventing, learning through direct experience, how these stories are coming to life now and how they want to be told differently. In large part, these goddesses were represented by the Greek and Roman mythology. They were told in patriarchal stories. And so the lens through which they've been seen, for example, Juno being associated, she was the wife of Jupiter. She's associated with marriage, but she's also associated with jealousy, having a husband who was a philanderer. These are very core stories that when we see relationships playing out in our own lives or in the collective, where we see those dynamics of partnership, where possession and attachment, where females were essentially possessions of their owner up until, and marriage law was that you didn't have your own identity until 1972, when women were given the right to have credit in their own names. legally, at least in the United States. And so these sort of distortions of the feminine and what it means to be in relationship to them are really, I think, calling us towards a deeper level of soul growth and healing. And right now, much of the work with the goddesses is related to this core journey that the nodes of the moon are traveling through Taurus and Scorpio this year. That in particular, anything that's moving through the sign of Aquarius and Leo is squaring that nodal axis. And Juno, Vesta, both are actually moving through that square to the nodal axis at different points throughout this year. They're also making very important conjunctions to Neptune and to Jupiter. I think it'll be really, deeply healing for us as we see and begin to work with these stories in our own lives. What is still true? What parts of these stories are playing out in our collective and in our lives and in our consciousness? And there's very much a deconditioning process, right? To come into marriage or to partnership as equals, not as a possession of one another, not as anything special, right? That's an evolution of consciousness in relationship. Vesta is the goddess of the sacred hearth. She represents devotion, the light of the temple. When we come into relationship with our own light, with our own sovereignty, that actually, the truth of each and every being on this planet is that we are an illumination of that divine light. And where our devotion lies, where we're called to give ourselves in service to a larger, tending. And Vesta is also, very often associated with the home and the hearth, because for the modern day person, we don't live in temples, and most of us don't even go to temples unless it's part of your spiritual practice, right? In Buddhism, in many different organized religions, there is a temple, there's a place of worship. But when we begin to treat our home and our life, our body, our mind as this sacred and very sovereign vehicle, right? A given vehicle for the divine, for God to come through us, for light to come through us and be expressed. It's a completely different orientation that evolves us forward, even though it's rooted in these very ancient ways. Pallas Athene was the daughter of Jupiter. She represents intellect born of the mind of a god. When we think about what is it like to embody feminine wisdom, which is very different, let's say archetypally than masculine wisdom, but she was the daughter of a god. So she was a female incarnation that possessed what they would have identified as masculine intelligence, capacities to be in the nature, in the wild, abilities to move instinctively, but with intuition, with embodiment. We can bring that together with her current, placement where she's conjuncting with Chiron, who is also a master teacher, a master healer, a medicine maker. And what is it like to actually take the wounds of our life, the things that have hurt us so deeply, right? These the sort of core wounds that we're all having on some level, and really make the choice. Okay, my life path is about healing this, making this into medicine, turning this into wisdom, but taking my own direct experience. And that's a big part of what I created the Healing with the Goddesses resource guide with. We each have a work to do. We have soul work to do. We have a path that we're walking. We have wounds that we carry. And the more we actually own those as carrying intelligence, actually there's a divine intelligence in what we're called to learn, to heal, to grow in, that would be that embodiment of Pallas Athene. And Ceres, she was the mother goddess. She was Persephone's mother in the story of the daughter who's kidnapped by Pluto and taken to the underworld, right? What is it like to have a part of yourself just taken down under the world, right, into the shadows? And her daughter had to face all these challenges. What is it like to feel so separated from some inherent, you know, if you've ever had children, you know that like there's all of a sudden there's a part of yourself that is living outside of your being. And if that is taken, or if you're cut off from that part, but even without having the experience of having actually given birth to children, we can know that sometimes the darkest parts of our lives can feel like a part of us has been taken somewhere. And what she did was she declared winter on Earth. You know, she froze the earth and said, no one gets to eat until my daughter is returned safely. Like there is a way in which we can take a stance against, okay, something has to change. Something has to change. And our being separated from the heart, or that truth, which that part of ourself that is so beloved, and also requiring nourishment, requiring, you know, all of these. She's the goddess of agriculture. And of course, when her daughter is returned, then spring and summer come and things bloom and fruits grow and everything is plentiful. There's so much abundance of the produce and the, you know, the fruit trees and everything during the summertime. And that's attributed to her getting her beautiful, beloved daughter returned to her. And when we have this part of ourselves that we are reunited with, there is an ability to really be grounded in, okay, now I can grow things. Now I know I have what I need to grow these things, right? And we all crave and desire true nourishment and beauty and grace. And with the North Node in Taurus, especially ruled by Venus, we're talking about a draw from a soul perspective to grow things, right? And in relationship to the Ceres myth, you know, the South Node in Scorpio, ruled by Mars or ruled by Pluto in evolutionary astrology, really speaks to, okay, that part of us, that shadow piece, that stuff that's taken under, that needs to be, wherever we're holding secrets, wherever we feel we have to hide, wherever there's shame, wherever those deep wounds are, you know, that is the mud from which the lotus grows. You know, it is the compost from which the tree sprouts, the plants, the beautiful flowers grow. But it's also the place where we have to actually choose consciously to go down into that material and to bring it up, and there can be a need for knowing that doing that work is going to bring us back some part of ourselves. In shamanic work, they refer to it as like soul retrieval. Really, it's like about going back and getting those lost parts and bringing them back in and integrating them in the psyche. And I think Scorpio very much speaks to the psyche and the psychological integration of our shadow and of our lessons. And so all of these goddesses, and in particular, you know, their journeys, not only through this year, but their journey through our birth chart, through the lens of what we're coming here with imprints of, and also through our evolutionary journey, as we're learning more about ourselves, as we're coming to understand, okay, these old stories, they don't necessarily serve to be repeated anymore. But when you're recovering ancient knowledge, when we're remembering things, let's say the perspective of the feminine about these stories that were never told, right? No one interviewed Juno and was like, what do you actually feel about this? You know, how do you actually feel? Like, what's your experience? We really are having to come from a place of understanding that's not, it's not linear and it's not in a book, right? It can't be found or taught by, you know, an astrologer. And a part of what I'm really encouraging in my own practice and the way I teach is like, how do we reconnect with these archetypes, remember maybe ancient pieces that have been forgotten, but also shed, you know, those core stories while coming back to our direct experience again and again. What does this feel like? What is this? How does this express in our lives today? And if something is ready, I feel like a lot of this year is very much, what are we ready to shed? What are we ready to grow, you know, throughout the year? And each of these aspects of the goddess are encouraging us all. Grow this, right? Grow equal partnership. Juno and Aquarius right now, right? And then she's going to move into Pisces for most of the year. With her retrograde, pretty much through the end of the year, she'll spend in Pisces. That's growing the divine relationship, growing the relationship to spirit, to our source, right? And same with Vesta. Vesta's in Aquarius right now. It's like our collective devotion, our collective choice of knowing ourselves as sovereign and equal, regardless of gender, sexuality, spiritual identification. There is no human being on this planet that does not at some level come through the equality of the one, right? And we can be born into different environments and have different socioeconomic or conditioning, right? Saturn type conditioning, right? You're born to a rich family, you're born to a Black family, you're born in a female body assigned that gender or whatever. But actually, all human beings are born through the womb of a mother. They come from the seed of a mother and a father coming together. They are an expression of the divine, and they are a soul in an embodied form. Before we start to label and condition them as such, as things, right? We all have these universal qualities. We all are born and we all die. There are things that are inescapable about humanity. And thus, when we all sort of come back together to a place of remembering ourselves as no different, not separate, there is that very core piece of then, okay, but there's my light. My sovereign light has a very specific devotional quality, devotional calling. There's a prayer that I'm carrying that I can see reflected in you, and you know, and it may be on some level that all things that we experience as human beings are experienced by all beings. When we can go up to the level of really seeing that there's nothing that I can do that doesn't impact you on some level. And thus the calling for bringing my light, for bringing my gifts, for bringing all of myself in how I'm showing up, and doing the work of healing these sort of ancient stories, releasing the things that aren't necessarily true. Like a lot of stories are fiction, and we very much play them out as truth, and we very much take them, there can be a whole process of disillusionment that happens for us when we realize something in our life that we thought was true all this time isn't even true about us. Mm-hmm. And that process then gives way to a really vulnerable stripping away of the things that we've come to believe about ourselves, the things we've come to believe about life. I remember the first time I realized that, like, the color blue, somebody made that up. Somebody made that up and gave it a name. And it led to a further realization of, like, oh yeah, all things in the world, somebody made that up. Mm-hmm. And, some man told that story, or somebody said, this is such. Mm-hmm. And we often believe these things to be entirely true, when there's a difference between, objectively true or true to some extent, and true for all. True with a capital T can be applied. And so a lot of these goddesses and the remembrance that I'm aware of is a big, big process for our collective right now, is a matter of really sorting through what's true for some, and what's true for all, and actually coming back to ourselves as a basis for learning through our own lives, learning through our direct experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. When I was channeling the draft that I've written now of Goddesses Speak, the book that will come out when it's ready to come out, but it's mostly written. When I was channeling that, what was so kind of mandated by whatever was channeling is that each of these archetypes are energies, and that the ultimate reality is, of course, that we are source, and then source, like, you know, a set of the energies of the infinite, if the infinity of source will choose to play a dance, and that dance they're infinite, literally infinite dances of source, and we are each one of those, or multiple of those, or whatever, but each of the archetypes is a particular dance of source. So in this book, what it does is help us, it basically like holds space for us to remember what it is to be infinite source, and then allow the energetics of a particular archetype to reconfigure as us, like as me, as you. And then we experience whatever it is we're meant to experience as, let's say, the energetic of Juno, or the energetic of Ceres, or the energetic of whatever, and allow through our bodies, through our voice, through our writing, through whatever, to express itself, for that Juno energy to express itself in the moment. And when you're saying, you know, we're bringing back this ancient knowledge, that's what's coming to me is, oh, of course, that's part of the point there, is that there's no one way to experience any of these archetypes. And there's probably things that each of us would bring forward that nobody else would, that are actually pieces of things that have been forgotten, that wouldn't have been told in the mainstream narrative, or, you know, patriarchal narrative.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited for this symposium that you're putting on, because it feels like a lot of what's being called forth is people who are in this process of remembering and helping others to remember. And thus, you know, rather than relying upon the same stories that, and it's rare to find a lot of astrological books about the goddess. Yeah. It's rare to find anything beyond those sort of core myths and narratives. And yet there are people on the forefront and of research, of, you know, education, and of their own spiritual practice, whether that be through, you know, any different healing modality, right? There are people who are in this process of really remembering ancient wisdom, but it's coming through in modern times. It's coming through their healing practice, their gift, their offering to the world. And I think you've gathered some really incredible people who are just displaying how this is, so how we can learn, how we can remember how our oneness, but also these aspects of ourselves that have been so forgotten, you know. And if we're moving too fast through a modern culture, we might not even notice that some of these very core stories are still playing out, you know. And yet every time, for example, with Juno, every time, like the archetype of the jealous wife or the possession, like every time jealousy arises inside of us, right? And it's like such a negative emotion. It's such a like ugly facet of ourselves. But in choosing to consciously face this, in choosing to face it in relationship to, oh, I am Vesta, a sovereign vehicle of the divine light. And I am, you know, when I'm free of fear and a need to possess in relationship, actually we both stand as equals. I see Venus and Mars like standing on either side of the equal sign, right? I can see how Juno and Jupiter were considered equals in some ways, but so much of the story wrapped up around her was that, was this power over, power under, subversive, energetic between these two gods, the god and the goddess, right? And so when we play that out in the human domain, where the man has the most power in the relationship, or the husband, like, you're not worth anything unless you have a husband, kind of like all these sort of really distorted beliefs about what it is to be a human being in relationship to one another, what marriage even means, like what does it mean to be married, and our souls are craving for the sacred union, which is the inherent union of those two original seeds of God, which have come together to be one, which only have one source. So when we come back to that total remembering, we all came from two that were one, and that one that came from the one, that's it. It's relatively simple. That would be that movement, into a return of that memory. And then from there, when we're in relationship to one another, it's a completely different way of seeing. And these things are great to say as a philosophy or as an idea, but to actually live the embodiment of these ideas and of these of this sort of like reinvention of the stories actually requires us to face some really deep shadow material. It requires us to face deconditioning around marriage, relationship, around our bodies, around sexuality, around gender. It requires us to actually look at like the way we have commodified parenting and partnership, and the normalized the single family domestic life, and how all those things have created constrictions and fed consumerism and fed like a sense of alienation and isolation for so many people. It's fed oppression, right? The marriage laws in the United States came out of early colonizer laws related to Black and white slaves being forbid to marry one another. And those laws created what the basic foundation and structure upon which racism in the South in particular, but in the United States, in our collective mindset of what it meant to be white, right? Versus how we were before these labels and identifications became such. All of these things have different roots in these archetypal goddesses. And there is a relative path of really questioning, really learning, really coming to understand some of the roots of these things so that we can heal them, so that we can face, okay, in my daily life, maybe these ways of being don't fit anymore, but I haven't actually found a way of being that fits me, right? And I feel our stretch to really know something beyond what we've known before, and how incredibly powerful this time is for souls to evolve on this planet, and really to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can't live like this anymore. So many of us are struggling with poor health, with struggling with relationships falling apart, and things, structures of the very structures of our life sort of failing us, and for good reason, right? They were built on stories that weren't designed for us to feel well and healthy and embodied and clear expressions of the divine. And so we have to kind of go through the muck in order to return to where we truly know ourselves to be from, right? That original source. And I really appreciate you bringing together such an incredible group of people to share different facets of this dynamic. Yeah.
Thank you. What I'm wondering is, if you feel comfortable, I wonder if we could just drop into each of these 4 goddesses, like for a few minutes at a time. And what I'd be really especially curious to hear is, like, if we take Juno, for example, could you drop into, for you in your personal life and in your work, what is the wisdom, what is the wisdom of Juno? What is the gift of Juno? What is kind of, what do you feel in your body and in your soul and in yourself when you just are with that energetic in your own truth, you know?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll start with Juno and I'll go through the 4 core. And if we could, so we could narrow down each one to a core word. So I'll give you a word for each goddess, and then, some of the gifts. So the core word for Juno would be commitment, and we see marriage often as this idealized level of commitment. Of course it is, but in the ways in which it's been distorted, it's become about only romantic love. It's become about, a particular thing that we have lost sight of what is commitment. And we commit ourselves every day to things consciously and unconsciously. Notice any habit, anything you do on a daily basis, anything you agree to, anything you sign. Most of the time we're moving through life committed to things that we're not even aware of our commitment to it. We're not aware of our relationship to it. And thus, of course, how many times have you been asked to, like, check the little box when you sign up for something and you're agreeing to the terms and conditions of what it is that it's like, if you were to actually read some of those terms and conditions, you might be clearly disturbed by what you're actually committing to. But most of the time we just sort of move through the day. If you looked at your habits of, how you relate to we can often say, I'm into long-term commitment. I'm stay in my relationships, or that person's like non-committal, right? They don't stick with what they do. But either way, conscious or unconscious, there's some level of commitment to everything that we're in relationship with. And when we really understand that, and that commitment becomes part of, like, seeing ourselves in equal relationship to everything we're giving energy to, really knowing, oh yeah, I am on a committed path with the divine, and that path is number one, right? People in their incarnations in our lives come and go, right? Relationships come and go. Places where we live, choices that we make, those things come and go. Our very core commitment is to our Creator, right? And then we are in commitment and we are in relationship to everything else that's around us. But by not consciously engaging in that commitment, we can easily do something and then kind of give up on it, let it fizzle out, or be engaged with something and not give our whole heart to it. And a lot of where we're called to evolve is actually to be conscious in our choices of what we're committing, whom we're committed to, and to begin to see that in relationship to everything that is present for us. Mm-hmm. It's also, healing of these very core pieces of where marriage or where relationship, where, this could be a commitment between business partners, between, friends, it doesn't have to simply be this monogamous, marriage relationship that's often associated with Juno. But we have Juno right now, Aquarius and Pisces, right, is her pretty much predominant signs for most of 2022. But even beyond that, she'll move through the whole zodiac, all expressions of commitment in various different facets of, in particular, the, you know, the equal, that which is belongs to work with one another. We have to work together. Part of our evolution is in realizing what I think I can do alone can actually not be done alone. And thus giving our life to, oh, okay, yeah, there is a different way of seeing this, and coming into relationships where we're consciously choosing. And in the Course in Miracles, they call this the concept of the holy companion, right? The holy companion is not a special relationship. It does not exclude anyone. Everyone we come into contact with is a holy companion. So that could be the seemingly incidental interaction with the man at the grocery store, whom you don't even know his name, or the person that you spend a lifetime working things out with, the children that you raise, the people that you work with or interact with. Everyone, when seen as a holy companion, gives us an opportunity to know ourselves and to know the divine at a much deeper level. It gives us the opportunity to forgive, to understand, to learn how to love one another. But when we exclude the importance of relationship to these special relationships, you know, to only married partners or to only people that we're like contractually binded to, we lose sight of the very gift of all beings in our life, all other persons, you know. And this is expressed in the wheel of the zodiac as that polarity, you know, from first house to seventh house, right? Those two exist and coexist with one another. I can't be me without you. I've been having this realization that, you know, real true forgiveness happens at the level of seeing that I, you, and we are all the same. And so this is just part of that healing opportunity with Juno and commitment. And then we have Vesta, right? And I would say the word for Vesta is devotion. Devotion is, you know, often used in spiritual language, but and it's connected to the root word of disciple, or to follow, to and it essentially means to give oneself, you know, to be. And when we're in devotion to something, you know, we're giving of our life force, of our energy. We're really, it's taking that commitment to the next level of like actually tending something very sacred and important. Most people will say like, oh, I've devoted my life to working with, you know, XYZ in their career, right? They've given themselves to working on some project or some cause. We can unconsciously devote ourselves to all sorts of things, all sorts of thoughts, beliefs, agendas, you know, and to truly come to a place where we are devoting ourselves to that which is most holy and most sacred, that which is calling us from within and to our spiritual practice, to our life, right? This can exist in every element of our life. It can exist in the way you wash the dishes. You know, they talk about in Buddhism, mindfulness, right? Mindfulness to me is an expression of devotion. It's bringing our attention to the present moment and simply being with what is right here and right now. Anything, how we care for our home, how we take care of our belongings, how we eat can be a sign of devotion to the one, right? To the one light, but which we're particularly tending in our own life, in our own vehicle, this suit, right? And devotion can be a singular act. It can be something that's very internal, and it can be an external act. It can be a song. It can be a sharing. It can be being in relationship to something outside of ourselves. There's a calling with Vesta to return to a sovereign devotion and a sacred devotion to what is. And that's always what's true in the present moment. That's always something, you know, and we can see the evidence of like, oh, when we haven't been devoted to something, things fall apart, right? If we haven't taken care of our body, it starts to suffer, it starts to struggle. And if we haven't taken care of our home, if we haven't cleaned up, it's a mess, right? If we haven't devoted our minds to peace, we can easily be agitated and triggered by things that are happening all the time. All of these, you know, bring us to, okay, I can just return again and again as a living practice to come back to what am I devoted to in this moment. And sometimes that requires us to let go of, okay, that actually isn't, I realize I've been giving my attention to that, or I've been doing this, or I haven't been caring for this. And we just, you know, start again, right? Over and over again. That's the thing about Vesta, it's tending the flame. But if the candle goes out, or if the light is dimmed, we actually have the capacity to relight, to reignite, to reconnect with that, to create more space so that that light can be illuminated and grown within our own lives. And Pallas Athene, I would equate to the word of wisdom. And this is the wisdom that isn't learned from a book and isn't taught to us, but comes through us. It's wisdom that's inherent intelligence. A lot of people think that you have to teach children how to do things. But I can tell you, my 2-year-old wasn't taught necessarily how to be. She just is. She has an inherent wisdom inside of her. There's a word that one of my teachers used to use called entelechy, which is like an inherent intelligence. It is the nature of a sperm and an egg, you know, of that original seed to be an adult. In that thing, in whatever it is, there is all the inherent wisdom that is necessary, the intelligence of that being to evolve and to grow. And so we really aren't teaching children anything other their intelligence is simply absorbing that which is around them, mirroring, learning. And we don't lose that as adults. We might lose awareness of the wisdom that lives within us. And we could call it, oh, like my gut told me this, or I don't know how I knew how to do it, but I just did, in a moment where we weren't using the mind to decide how to do something. And we can often give too much credit to intelligence that's learned over time. And where there's value in practicing something, right? That's where devotion and wisdom go together, right? You practice meditation on a daily basis because you gain wisdom and insight into the nature of your own mind, into the nature of reality by continuing to practice. All of these things, commitment, devotion, wisdom, they all go together. They all complement one another. And I use them as sort of 4 corners of living. And the last one is nourishment, or we could call it nourishment and care, right? All life requires nourishment in order to survive. In order to thrive, we really need that nourishment and care. And a baby is born with that inherent intelligence to want for nourishment and care, to need the milk, the care of the mother in order to grow. And we all need that. So with that nourishment, we're talking about the growing of things, the growing of food, of course, and agriculture as related to Ceres, the mother goddess. I've been reading this book called Mother Hunger, which talks about particularly the relationship between mothers and daughters, and what happens when mothers where daughters are raised without secure attachment from the mother.
Yeah.
And you know, the author is brilliant in really articulating part of the Ceres myth, which is that we come into life requiring that core nourishment, care, and protection. And without those three things, we cannot survive. There is, babies will die if not touched and fed and loved. We are needing that even as adults. We're needing that from each other and from ourselves. And so I see Ceres as being this deeper calling to healing, that mother-daughter, but it doesn't even have to be mother-daughter. It could be mother-son as well, or mother-child, right? The mother-child dynamic of where we were not receiving that original care, nourishment, and secure attachment. There is a deep healing and coming back to, what do I need right now in order to feel nourished, to feel cared for and supported? And what do I, how do I, what's my way of nourishing, right? Because we're giving and receiving all the time. And, we can't give what we don't have. Like if we're depleted, if we're exhausted, if we're emotionally, physically, mentally, without that core nourishment, there isn't anything much for us to give. And so part of the healing with these archetypes is that when we put these four corners together, it creates a living wisdom, a living way for us to be with our direct experience and begin to build a foundation of, okay, I am committed to what's in my life. I am devoted to the act, to the daily practice, to the things that are needing to be done in my life. I am using my direct experience to learn, to grow, to cultivate wisdom about, the things that I'm here to grow. And I'm really cultivating core nourishment in my relationships for myself, whether that's self-care, whether that's community care, whether that's in relationship to another. But, our soul knows, okay, I know what I need in order to feel that. And if we didn't get that core nourishment as a child, there's a remembering and a repatterning, because I actually have to learn what it feels like to have secure attachment. I have to learn what it feels like to care for oneself, to ask for care, to ask for help, to ask for support. And these, I think, are really core ways in which we can live the embodiment of the goddesses in their most high expression, in their way of where now I know more about myself, more about what I'm here to give, the gifts that I have, and I can share that with others because of these are the four corners of my work with the goddesses. So that's really what I've been reflecting on most. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's exactly what I was looking for. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, I would love to hear then how you apply this in your own work, but before we go to that, is there any other thing that you're wanting to speak to around any of this?
I guess it's connected to how I apply it in my own work, to wherever, I think a lot of what I've been called to, especially in this process of remembering with the goddesses and reinventing these stories, is these deeper healings where some of these core traumas arise, where we don't know how to ask for help. We don't know what nourishment is or secure attachment. And I think a big part of my own soul work has been facing the parts of myself that are immature in growing, I grew up in a very patriarchal conditioned world, and I sort of, joined the mainstream culture and complied and was, like didn't know any different until I had, several very core moments of awakening in my life that led to where I am today, which really is to acknowledge that all of this is an ongoing, we are a work in progress. And if we could all wake up one day and just remember who we are, everything would be solved. But the journey of our souls is actually this process of just daily coming back to, I can wake up in the morning and feel like I'm on my path and doing great. And then something can come in, and it can easily be that I feel like I've failed or not met, that part of myself, or not communicated well, or not done, and it's like, and there's a deeper calling, especially with this relearning for immense forgiveness, for mercy, for real understanding of like, oh yeah, it's okay to find our way, to make mistakes, to have to come back to this again and again. If you've ever sat in meditation, that like the mind doesn't stop chattering. It doesn't not wander. That's just what is. And we can't say, well, I quit, I'm not going to meditate anymore because I obviously have one of those minds that doesn't work for this. No, everybody has that problem. I don't know. And even no matter how the most serious meditator, maybe the lesser, we would think that they're like enlightened, but they're off too. We all are in this work in process. And a part of what my work with intentional creativity is with bringing like energy and emotion to the canvas, and painting and using color and image and to express things that are inside. And it's like, it's messy, and it takes, and I'm like, I can go through and all of a sudden do something, and I'm like, I don't know how I did that, but that's great, it's beautiful. And I can completely feel like I come to the end of a painting process and look at something, and there's like, oh, I hate that. Like, that's a place where, I just, I really don't like that. It will, and I'm in this process of really learning how to let it all be. Let the parts of my life that are unresolved, the questions, the places that are unhealed, to let them be. Let them be a part of the canvas. Let them be. Like, I can be with that uncomfortable, messy thing that's on the canvas, and it can be right next to the most beautiful thing that I absolutely love about that painting. They exist together, and they're all a part of an ongoing unfolding, which maybe someday I'll feel called to like cover that one thing or repaint it, or maybe even that terrible part of the painting will become something beautiful because over time I come to understand it differently. And I've been really like, I apply all of this to my life with the perfect imperfection that is how I am here and now. And I can look back at photographs of myself from years ago and be like, oh yeah, she didn't know what she didn't know, And that's the entelechy, the inherent intelligence. Like, to meet ourselves exactly where we are, with what we have, with what we're doing, and have the courage to face it, knowing that like, just because I was raised in a dysfunctional family, or I didn't have the care or nourishment that I really wanted from, from parents or people or whatever in relationship, doesn't mean that it's not possible. Doesn't mean that there aren't things that I need to do to grow, but just to really hold it all. The beautiful and the ugly, the old stories that are wanting to be shed, the past, which it longs to be let go of because it doesn't really exist anyways. Like, it doesn't serve us in any way to hold on to it. I was telling a story in my month ahead video, for this month, and of just one of those experiences where I realized like I was really carrying a resentment for a long time. And I heard this one phrase of like, you're riding a dead horse. Mm. And in that realization, like, all of a sudden I became aware of something that I had a choice, and I made the choice to let go. I made the choice to let go in the best way that I could then. And it was totally liberating. And a part of what we're dealing with in this particular nodal cycle and this evolutionary cycle for humanity is there's so much we're being called to liberate ourselves from. So many old structures, so many old beliefs, so much past wounding and trauma, that when we look around us, if we continue to find where am I called to grow and what am I called to let go of, and just recognize that it's in a perfect imperfect cycle of unfolding, that we are exactly where we need to be, I think we can have a little bit more grace with ourselves in the process. And that's been probably the deepest teaching for me in these times, because otherwise it's hard and humbling and sometimes difficult to swallow everything that's happening right now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think about, I think it's Sharon Blackie, the author, who said this, but probably a lot of people have said this, is that all these, what you're saying brings me back to the archetypes, which is this idea that the archetypes are living. They're not artifacts that we're going to put in a museum and look at behind a glass window or something. You know, they're not static. They're continually unfolding like we are, and because we are them. And so when I think about you saying that there are these, you know, we want to embrace all of who we are and what we are right this minute, it seems similar, parallel to what you were talking about with the archetypes, that there are these old stories that we're shedding, and there are these old stories of these archetypes that we're also shedding. I mean, it's not a coincidence, right? And so but at the same time, there's like a parallel process of having patience, or I don't know, love, some kind of compassion or something for ourselves. And then also these storylines that our collective is, that we don't like, that are hopefully going away, that are restorying themselves, or whatever it is. But like with Juno, you know, she is absolutely about commitment. And then there's this reality that there are these energies of jealousy and this more difficult energies that do come up in the world and in ourselves. And we can't deny that those exist. And yet at the same time, we wouldn't want to fixate on a Juno jealousy energy, right? That wouldn't be helpful to me. But we don't want to deny that it's a thing too. So it's like this, it's not a linear process. Like you said, it's a dynamic, fluid movement that we're in. Like it's a dance we're in with all of these stories and all of the archetypes and all of the history and all of ourselves. And we can't separate any of it, really.
I truly believe that the archetypes are in an evolutionary process themselves. That there's no, if we are, as souls are evolving and we're in a constant evolutionary process of evolving, ultimately to return to source, like if that's the basis of what we're all doing here in these bodies and in these incarnations, the archetypes themselves are also evolving right along with us. And yet we identify with them consciously or unconsciously as part of our personal story, right? Our myth, our narrative. And one of the beauties of the archetypes is that they can be put sort of up here in this larger way where we can see, oh yeah, that's not us. That's something archetypal. And when we can do that, and all of a sudden it's not personal, we can see that there's a part of a larger evolution that's at play here. It's not personal, and yet I have my part. I have my part in facing when jealousy arises inside of me, when comparison would be the other thing. It's like how on Facebook you can be looking at, and one could easily get depressed if you're in a particular state and looking at everybody's life, like, oh, look, they're getting what they're wanting, and they're happy, and they have this and that. And it's like all of a sudden that projection of comparison, which could be a facet of Juno, or a facet of that jealousy piece. And we are feeling insignificant, alone, isolated, depressed, or, really like not good enough. Like, these are all things to face inside of ourselves. And sometimes it means stepping away from the projection, right, of the Facebook world or social media world, where we say, like, actually, no, I'm going to choose to go within. I'm going to choose to not see my life in comparison to somebody else's life, unless I'm actually consciously making the choice to see someone's life as an inspiration. Oh, see, they're doing something that in my heart is also longing for. Or see that aspect of the light in them. I can see even jealousy of another person is often simply reflecting back to us some quality within, which is inherent. It's latent. We couldn't see it unless it was there, right? And the same thing, the reverse of that, of like hatred or rejection, being like, oh no, that's that shadow quality of like, that's not me. Anytime I'm like, that's not me, like, that's my red flag to say, wait a second, what's happening here? Because if I want to reject that, attack that, defend that, protect that, like, something else is going on. And this is the way the wisdom of the archetypes and even the triggers of the old stories of the ancient can be brought into our own awareness as a place to heal, to really learn to love and accept ourselves, to really to see things that, oh, okay, I don't want to accept that, or I want that and I don't have it, all these different things. And then we can actually face them and find even deeper healing in our own lives, where we become free of like the constraints of comparison, of jealousy, of possession, of, feeling alone, right? Because ultimately these all lead back to feelings of being alone in some way, that are being healed when we know that we're all one in some way, that we're never alone. And yeah, so I think, it's big work. And my encouragement with all of this is just to take it in its most simple form in your daily life, in your daily practice, in how you're learning about yourself, and how you're, how we integrate astrology into the lens of how we see life, what stories we're tuned into. This is a part of a collective remembering, rewriting that who knows how long this book goes on for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, eternity.
So, yes, literally. Do you want to give a little overview snapshot of what you're offering and what you're
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Martha. Yeah, on the goddessastrologycollective.com, I have a monthly moon ceremony that is more of a channeling of the aspects of the moon and the goddesses, and an open space for prayer and reflection. It's beautiful, deeply devotional time where we're actually tuning into these energies, and that's every month. And it is open, so you can drop in at any time, but I also really encourage people to commit to the monthly container, to come every month. Members who make that choice to come in every month receive access to the recordings and to special content and themes and overviews that I do on the website. And then I teach a class on the goddesses. Right now I have 4 of the goddesses posted. And, it's a part of my own process that I shared of like really listening and tuning in and reflecting on what's alive. And so all of your listeners will receive the free yearly overview that I did, and along with the ephemeris and the guide. And, there's tons of richness in there. But if there was one or two goddesses that you wanted to really deep dive into, you can get the recordings of those on the website. And yeah, and I have in the one-on-one space, you know, I do personal readings, both on Goddess Astrology Collective and astrologywithmichelle.com, where we're looking at your natal chart and tuning into the goddesses, the soul work, the healing, the family dynamics, the karmas that are coming through. And I really look at like what's happening in the present moment, most of all. I think that is like meeting ourselves exactly where we are and beginning the work from there. Not so much predicting the future. I'm not a predictive astrologer, but really tuning into the energies and the things as they're unfolding. And I do soul work, which is more broad in that we use the chart, we use the astrology, but a lot of what I'm called to bring in is the intentional creativity, the aspects of like these deeper pieces of healing and soul growth. And it's my joy and delight to be of service in these ways. And I'm so grateful to you for creating this space and bringing all these amazing people together to just have these incredible conversations.
I'm grateful to be doing it. I'm grateful you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So your websites are
astrologywithmichelle.com and it's goddessastrologycollective.com.
Right. And then you have a YouTube channel.
I do, which is the Astrology with Michelle YouTube channel. Yeah. And every week there, I post a free weekly week ahead video where I tune in. And I'm doing monthly overviews and free classes every quarter. So I just did a free class on the equinox, tuning into the equinox energies for this time period. And I'll be offering a free class coming up in the next few months on the eclipse cycles for this nodal cycle, the Taurus Scorpio eclipse axis.
Beautiful. Great. Anything else? Wonderful.
So much love. Thank you.